is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners in cooperation with Prophecy DeFi. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of DeFi Decoded. This is actually a very special episode because it is our 21st episode. For everyone who knows about Bitcoin and the hard cap on how many Bitcoins there will be, 21 is a very significant number. I hope we never get to 21 million. I hope I'm retired before then, but at least for now, we're happy to be hitting this milestone. And I'm also very happy that we have a very special guest with us coming back again, our first repeat guest, Charlie Morris, who is a partner and founder at CMCC Crypto Capital, one of the leading venture capital firms and one of the longest running venture capital firms in the crypto asset industry. Charlie, welcome back to the show. You just got back from a bit of a whirlwind tour, which included a stop in Lisbon. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, hi guys, great to be back again. Yeah, so I was in Lisbon a couple of weeks ago at the Solana Conference, Breakpoint, which was, just a great event. It was, I guess, kind of strange but familiar to be back in a place with so many people all at the same time. So kind of nice to see the world coming a bit back to normality. I guess on that event, firstly, in terms of the event itself, the guys did a phenomenal job. There were 3 venues. So there was this kind of big main stage in a big warehouse where all the kind of primary talks went on. There was then a developer stage, which was at a really kind of lovely venue, actually down by the water. And then they had this ecosystem stage, which was inside basically like a botanical gardens in the heart of Lisbon. So really kind of interesting venues, and lots of interesting things that went on. Maybe what would be kind of interesting is to talk a bit about, firstly, who was there. So there was the classic mix of project teams, engineers, and investors. It was also interesting to see, Joe Lubin showed up. So there were clearly some Ethereum guys were clearly trying to kind of check out what was happening in the Solana ecosystem. And also, one thing I noticed from the investor side is, there were other, traditional VCs kind of like ourselves, but also quite a lot of these kind of quant shops, people like Jump Trading. And to me, that's a clear reflection on the type of community that Solana is building, because I think today it's fair to say if you want to do high frequency trading on a layer 1 protocol, Solana is really the only place you can do that properly today. And so it's interesting to see people like Jump, turning up in force at this conference. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the high level. Maybe to just kind of dive into a few takeaways that I had. Firstly, on the kind of the network level. So there were a lot of talks about Solana as a network and how it's getting on. And I met with a number of validators. So validators are basically the entities that are validating any proof of stake chain. So really kind of powering the network. I was very fortunate. I got invited to go surfing with the Chorus One team, which is one of the kind of leading validators in the space. And from speaking to them and to a number of other validators, I think a lot of them agree that Solana kind of today is the most technically sophisticated and probably the most complex system out of anything that they validate on. And I spoke to a guy called Hendrik, who was previously at a validator called Certus One, and he's actually now at Jump Trading. And his view is that if you wanted to design the absolute fastest layer 1 platform today, you would basically design Solana. And I think it's very clear, and you listen to kind of people like Anatoly, who's the CEO, speak. Anatoly's background was basically building operating systems at Qualcomm. And he really has redesigned a layer 1 platform. I think you can look at a lot of other kind of Ethereum killers, and a lot of them take what Ethereum has done and try to redesign bits and pieces of it, whereas Solana has really tried to redesign everything, and it's really taken everything from scratch. So what Solana is doing is quite different from a lot of other Ethereum killers, where a lot of other Ethereum killers, or are being named that way, basically have taken Ethereum's architecture and have tried to kind of redesign it in some way for some efficiencies. Whereas what Solana has done is really taken everything from scratch, which comes back to Anatoly himself, having been an operating systems engineer at Qualcomm. And so really with Solana, he has designed something completely from scratch, which is really, really interesting. And I think is a real positive for the network. However, there are some challenges that come with that. One of the main things you guys may have seen, a few weeks ago, the Solana network did go down for a period of time. And that, to be honest, is just that it is still very experimental. So many pieces of it are brand new and are very innovative, but that does make it experimental, and it makes the network, less stable than, other networks that are using things that have been tried and tested for a long time.
Okay, so I want to jump in here because we have talked about Solana going down, and we also have talked about the trilemma before. A reminder for the new listeners out there: the idea that when you're designing one of these platforms, you have three different things that you have to consider. Security, performance, and decentralization. And the whole thing is like pick two. So you might say for something like Solana that maybe they've traded this would be the criticism, that they've traded security for performance, and that's how you get the speed. But then again, you might see that the network goes down, and so maybe you want to use it for small dollar transactions. But if you ever want to settle something major on chain, you should probably use Ethereum or something. Like, that's a critique, and I think this is a really useful jumping off point, because over the weekend, we're in the sort of mid-November here, 2021. If you're watching this years later. There was a big battle over the weekend between some very heavy hitters in the industry talking about, layer ones, these platforms, and which ones will succeed and why. And one very prominent investor in the space basically kind of said Ethereum has failed to reach its potential, and right now other layer ones like Solana and Avalanche and others are basically eating its lunch and are going to continue to grow. So there's a couple things to think about. Like, one is this whole Ethereum killer framing, in my opinion, is incorrect, because Ethereum, it's true, has lost a share of DeFi. It had a monopoly on DeFi, and now it's a smaller percentage, 70%, but the total value on Ethereum has exploded in that period. So maybe everything can succeed at the same time. That would be sort of the first critique. And also, there seems to be an insatiable demand for block space and for computing potential. So that's why all of these things seem to be succeeding at once. But I want to talk about that framing, because you're an investor in the space, and I know that you have positions in lots of different things, obviously. And some might say, well, maybe that's because you're hedging your bets, or maybe it's because you have a different view. So can you talk about your view on this whole thing? Like, layer ones, which ones are going to succeed and why, or will they all succeed, or will one truly, rise to the occasion and become the one chain to rule them all? I would love to get some clarity from you on that. And then I know Andrew wants to jump in with some other questions.
Yeah. So it was quite a spicy weekend on Twitter. I'd actually like to dive into that debate, but to start with, on your question there, what do I believe in the future? I certainly don't believe there will be a single chain that will run all the world's transactions. I think that's very unlikely. And in particular, if you look at other technologies, there isn't one operating system that everyone uses. There is Windows, and there is Mac, and then, there are iPhones, there are Android. So, I think there will be a number. However, I actually think the number will be relatively small. I think there'll be a small number of extremely valuable layer ones. And one thing that I think is interesting is, if you look at the moment, there's kind of this multi-chain world is playing out right now. And by that, what I mean is, in fact, I think Sunny talked a bit about it with you on the podcast, where, at the moment you have a lot of applications that are spinning up on multiple chains at the same time. So that's kind of the multi-chain future. And an alternative to that is an interchain future, which is what kind of, Cosmos has been kind of a proponent of for years now, which I actually think is more likely, where you have applications spinning up specific chains and then connecting themselves with kind of all the other main chains. And so, in terms of kind of winners, obviously we're making our own bets. I think it's very important for any platform to have a real reason to exist. And so, something like, Terra, we're big fans of, because it's really very focused around a stablecoin ecosystem. That's basically what, their view is. We have these Terra stablecoins, and we're going to do DeFi all based around these stablecoins that we've created. And then you have something like Solana, which has said, look, we are going to be very, very fast and low cost. And that is actually a very easy proposition to communicate to users. And I think that's actually partly why Solana has done so well recently, is if you're a new user coming to the space today, the reality is, I'm a big fan of Ethereum and I love what they're doing. But right today, if you were to come and to try and use Ethereum or try and use Solana, you will have a better experience on Solana because it is faster and it is cheaper. Now, there is a decentralization question there, which is the big thing that everyone's been talking about on Twitter. And I think for me, this comes down to time horizons. So in a year, maybe it'll take longer, when ETH2 is a reality, then what will that experience feel like versus a Solana? And in that scenario, how much are people going to care about decentralization versus today, where it's just the user experience is just so poor on Ethereum right now. Andrew, I'd be interested actually to get your take as someone building a lot on Ethereum and layer twos as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, what you said, I think is potentially spot on, though I do have a slightly different view. The way I kind of to me, there's sort of two layers right now. There's Ethereum, which is essentially just focused purely on security. And then the next wave of ETH killers sort of trade off decentralization and security a little bit for scalability. So I think of them as sort of the scalability layer. And then I think I totally agree with you, which is that the third layer is going to be, there's going to be another layer of blockchains, maybe called L3s, that are focused around a specific application. So you pointed out Osmosis, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where they're focused on decentralized exchanges, Terra for stable coins. We're building a prediction market blockchain ecosystem at SX Network. But I think the one thing I would disagree is actually not that Ethereum is going to go from security layer up to scalability layer with ETH 2.0. I actually think it's the ecosystem is Ethereum is always going to be sort of that security layer focused on decentralization, maximization. Just because given the culture, Ethereum people are obviously very focused on security over everything else. And I actually think the future is the scalability layer blockchains will actually hook into the security model of Ethereum, the same way that Polygon does right now with Ethereum. They essentially do these checkpoints they essentially use Ethereum as like a backup layer and try to tether their security to Ethereum. And then that way it allows them to sort of present themselves as just as scalable, or like on the same sort of security as Ethereum, but then they're obviously still have the scalability sort of advantage. And then the application chains are going to be built into those kind of, are going to be either built off of those or just built off Ethereum directly, though I think that would be too expensive. So I could actually see, and then stuff like Solana is trying to compete with that security layer, which I don't know. I don't really know necessarily whether that's going to work, or whether, I guess the big question is, will Ethereum try to move up to become kind of the scalability layer, or will the scalability layer sort of tether their security to something like Ethereum, which is more secure? Hopefully, my hope is that Ethereum doesn't sort of abandon its focus on maximum decentralization and security, because I think that's a huge value prop that they've sort of cornered the market on. But the thing is, by doing that, you're giving up other things because you're not going to be as cheap, and so you're likely not going to have any applications built on Ethereum in the future. It'll just be a chain where other chains hook into. So that's kind of one, I guess, argument against that. I guess, and one thing one kind of big piece of news, which makes me think that this thesis is going to play out is the Solana CEO last week was quoted as saying that he doesn't think it's a big deal that Solana can go down for multiple hours at a time. Solana obviously had a sort of a 17-hour outage at one point. Just kind of curious your thoughts on, I guess, that quote, and then also how that affects, not to put you on, but how that sort of affects the applications that can be built on Solana.
Yeah, so I saw he got a lot of stick for that, and I think potentially, I know he said in response.
Is that an English expression? A lot of stick? Never quite heard that one.
Yeah. Sorry, maybe I think it is an English expression. I think also he felt he'd been slightly quoted out of context, where I think his point was it's not a big deal as long as the network can kind of come back online, and that, basically that, censorship, for example, hasn't happened. Obviously, he still thinks it's a big deal, and he doesn't want his network to be going down for 17 hours at a time. Yeah. So, and I think, Andrew, back to what you were saying, I don't disagree with your kind of hypothesis there. I think one of the things it makes me think about, though, is at the moment, the user experience is too complicated on Ethereum, moving between these different L2s. And so, for that vision of the future to play out, you need probably some wallet or some kind of ecosystem that just abstracts all of that away. And then the question becomes, well, if you have some system that is extracting away all of that complexity, then is that system itself not going to be potentially swayed to then move between different chains, or be, potentially be corrupted and incentivized by other chains to just move there? Because ultimately the users are not going to understand how any of this works, in the way that when you use the internet, you don't know which networks you're using or how it's routing between different CDNs, which are like content delivery networks. It seems to me that we have to abstract this stuff away, but then that also opens risk around losing out on decentralization and all of that. So I don't know if you have a view there.
Yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who sort of believe in that too. Like the consumer facing end will be sort of either a wallet or an aggregator. And I actually think that's why a lot of sort of investors are investing heavily at those layers, which I think makes sense. I will say the cross-chain UX has gone way better in the last 6 months. Like even when we built our app on top of Polygon, we did this sort of crazy thing where users would sign transactions on the Ethereum network, and then we would do meta transactions on Polygon, because the UX of actually switching networks was so poor that it was kind of a non-starter to be on a layer 2 really like 8 months ago. And MetaMask has made sort of big changes there to allow people to switch networks, but it is still totally crazy, especially now that we have kind of 20 EVM chains, which actually leads into my next question. Is there's sort of two different ecosystems being built now within this multi-chain future. There's sort of the, what I'll call the EVM side, which is the Ethereum virtual machine, which sort of leverages the fact that Ethereum's built all this tooling, there's all this distribution, all the wallets support sort of EVM compatible networks. And then something, not to hammer on Solana again, but Solana has sort of actually gone the other way, and it's built kind of using Rust. It doesn't have, at least to my knowledge, doesn't yet have EVM compatibility. And so you can't actually sort of take apps on Ethereum and easily deploy them on Solana. You actually have to kind of rebuild the whole thing. And I know there's kind of arguments for and against. Obviously, if you're EVM, it's easier to get apps to you, but then it's less defensible because there's so many EVM chains. I'm curious how you're thinking about sort of the difference between these two emerging ecosystems.
So I'll give you a couple of takes. Firstly, there is actually a project that was announced in Lisbon I think it's called Neon, where they are bringing the EVM to Solana. But I kind of think of that as almost like a side point. I think what's kind of interesting about Solana is by design, they've not incorporated the EVM, They are using Rust, and weirdly, it's basically, it is harder to build applications on Solana today. And I actually think from the core team, that's partly by design, that to start with, they wanted basically higher quality engineers to be building applications on Solana, so that the applications themselves would basically have better teams and better engineering, rather than making it crazy easy for like a teenager to just spin up some like DeFi app that then is not very good and has all sorts of bugs in it. So it's kind of, it's potentially a strategic play by them, which, you know, I think is interesting. And I also think, honestly, just for the whole space in general, helpful not to have everyone relying on the EVM. Having some diversification, I think, is a good thing.
Hey, Charlie, another question that I have, which is a lot of these new L1s like Avalanche and Solana are seeing a lot of growth in DeFi and NFTs and these other exciting areas. But one of the criticisms is that it's just a lot of copycat stuff. So, there's like a monkey on Ethereum becomes like a gorilla on Solana or something. And, it's nothing against the gorillas, but you see that. And then, the deck, whether it's the DEXs or the lending pools or all these different things, there's this sort of like, it's like a bit of a copy paste thing that's happening. Now, we actually had the Luigi, the head of DeFi for Ava Labs, and he was quite open about saying like, yeah, I mean, like there's already there's a product market fit for stuff on Ethereum. And so it makes sense that Avalanche and others see that sort of instant, recreation of those things. But the key is to create, native apps to that ecosystem that are different or better or special in some way. So how do you think of that being a driver of growth? So the application side, like the thing that does face consumers, driving the growth to the L1 rather than just like the underlying pure performance. Because in the end, right now, blockchains are not like a consumer tech because they're still only being used by a few million early adopters, but they will be a consumer tech. And so won't that be the thing that matters, is that you have the best things to do on the blockchain?
Yeah, so I think you're spot on there, Alex. And the thing that's like, as an investor, there's nothing more boring than seeing someone do a copycat of another project just on a different chain. And so as an investor, we're not really interested in that. We're only really interested in finding really unique use cases, and specifically things that are tailored to the chain that they're building on. So in Solana, maybe to give you a couple of examples, obviously DeFi and Solana, a lot is around high frequency trading, because that is something that you can do on Solana that you cannot do on Ethereum currently. And so it's interesting to, a takeaway would be, you see someone like Jump Trading. Jump Trading is like one of the largest trading companies in the world. Apparently, I heard in Lisbon, 1 in every 3 trades done in crypto is against Jump. That's how big they are. And so, just the fact that they are building things now on Solana, is a real positive for that ecosystem, showing that they can attract these kind of traditional giants because they're doing something that's unique. Another interesting area that came up, I guess, more than I expected at Lisbon, was around the metaverse. It kind of came up all over the place, people talking about it. And a couple of takes there. Firstly, I think about a year or so ago, any kind of blockchain event, it always felt like we were always trying to compete against like financial institutions or banks. And all of a sudden, it felt to me like there was this shift in Lisbon where people were talking about basically disrupting tech companies like your Facebooks of the world rather than banks. And Metaverse became kind of this kind of big thing. And there was actually a super cool talk by a guy called Jules Urbach, who runs a thing called Render Network. And what they're doing is it's kind of like it's like a marketplace for power, because it turns out the metaverse will require an extremely large amount of GPU power to power all the kind of animations and everything happening in real time. And so, these kind of networks, again, tethering themselves at the moment to something like Solana because of its speed, is very interesting. And I'm thinking a lot about how the metaverse is going to play out in the blockchain world, with obviously Facebook coming out with their rebranding and trying to become kind of very kind of keen on the space. Another announcement that was made in Lisbon was that Alexis Ohanian, who's one of the, I think, the co-founder of Reddit, he announced $100 million fund with Solana Ventures to basically build out what they call kind of Web3 social media, which again ties pretty directly into the metaverse. Yeah, I don't know if that's something you guys have been thinking about much or talking about recently.
We actually did a Web3 episode before it was cool. Before Meta was renamed. I think it was in August of this year. I think it's our least viewed episode because when it came out, people were like, what are you talking about? So I would encourage you to go back to the archives. We now have archives because we have 21 episodes to see the Web3 episode. Yeah, we talked about the metaverse. You know, Charlie, this is something that I've been writing about for a long time, blockchain revolution. I think 2 of the 10 chapters were dedicated towards banking and financial services. The rest was, what is the other potential of this technology? Now, at the time we wrote that, it was mostly conjecture because Ethereum had just launched and the first DAO hadn't even come into existence, and all of this stuff was pretty hypothetical. But it is nice to see it all playing out. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like, it seems like people would say Ethereum is the blockchain for cultural assets, right? I mean, that's where the real cachet happens. That's when you want to buy the Constitution, you raise money in ETH. When you want to, sell a Beeple, it's on Ethereum NFT. When the most valuable generative art series are all Ethereum based. Like, it's almost like Ethereum weirdly has this. Well, it's not to say that's the only thing it will do, but it has developed this reputation. Maybe it's because it was first and that won't last, but it seems like it has really a firm hold on the zeitgeist when it comes to like the most avant-garde, most interesting cultural things that are happening in blockchain right now. And I wonder what is going to be the blockchain of the metaverse, because it's not clear at all what that's going to be, and if that's even the right way to think about it, because maybe it's multi-chain. So I think that is interesting that we're starting to see a shift over to those different sectors.
Yeah, and I think on that point, definitely to me, multi-chain in the sense that, these high value NFTs, I fully see seeping into VR, and you walking around with a badge on your crypto punk somehow, maybe as your face or whatever.
Yeah.
But then again, if you're talking about maybe some of the underlying infrastructure around rendering, is that going to happen on Ethereum? Like, maybe not. And again, maybe, a lot of people talk about, ETH is money, and, ETH becoming this kind of hugely valuable asset, and maybe that's right, but it doesn't mean that Ethereum will actually be powering the infrastructure behind, the metaverse or VR or other kind of aspects.
Yeah.
I think one thing, just to kind of add on to that point, I think the first big, at least the way I'm sort of thinking about it, the first big use case of the metaverse is going to be sort of gaming. Like if you look at something like the movie Ready Player One, it sort of predicts that, like, because it's something where sort of being like, for example, Charlie, I believe you were saying kind of before the show, you just bought an Oculus. And sort of the first thing you do with VR, I mean, really the only thing you can do at this point is play video games. So I'm kind of curious how you think about the increasing sort of trend of play to earn. So for people that don't know, essentially the biggest blockchain-based application in the world now is actually this project called Axie Infinity, which uses sort of, it essentially uses, I don't even really know how to explain it too well, but essentially users, as they play the game, they first have to buy this, an Axie, which is kind of like an NFT, and it's like an asset that allows you to sort of play the game. And then as you play the game, you actually generate monetary rewards in the form of SLP tokens, which are like these potion tokens. And to me, that seems like a really, like right now, the games are still kind of analog because it's not yet in virtual reality. But I guess to me, what's really interesting is sort of throwing these ideas together: NFTs, playing video games and making money, and then also sort of the VR and metaverse. It's kind of like one of the most mind-boggling sort of things you can think about. Yeah. People, I'm curious, like sort of off topic, I guess, but I'm curious, like, have you guys looked into the play to earn space a little bit? What do you think of it? is it a fad, or do you think it's here to stay?
No, it's definitely here to stay. We're actually right now very, very close to making a new investment in this super company based out of Australia, where one of the founders was previously the #1 gamer on Axie. So he really understands this stuff. And what they are is that, I don't know if you're familiar with YGG or these guilds. So the idea here is that this group, it's actually a DAO. So the DAO has bought a bunch of NFT gaming assets, mainly Axies. So it has this portfolio of assets. It then lends them out to the top gamers in the world. Those gamers then play with these assets and earn money, and 50% of the revenue goes back to the DAO, and 50% stays with the gamer. So as an investor, what you're getting is potential upside on this portfolio of NFT gaming assets, plus the revenue being generated by those assets, which is just like, yeah, super cool. I think to me, that is like the future of esports. I think this is going to be like game changing, excuse the pun.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like people always sort of say, oh, what's going to happen when we kind of go to post scarcity world where we have sort of AI and technology like just that's created all this wealth, and like there's nothing for people to do. And this is kind of funny to say, but I think maybe people just play video games all day and actually earn income from sort of playing these games, which is either a utopia or dystopia, sort of depending on your worldview. But I'll pass it back to Alex, because I don't know if you had something to say.
I have a thought on this. I think it's funny that we started talking about L1 scalability, and now we're talking about AY's vision for a dystopian video gaming future. It's like, where did this conversation turn? On the topic of play to earn and everything, one of the most insightful takes that I saw was actually from SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried. Is it Fried or Freed? I've never... Fried?
Friedman, I think.
Freed. No, it's not Friedman, it's Freed. Or is it Friedman?
Freed, I think.
Freed, yeah. Anyway, SBF is what he's known by. These people don't have real names. So his view is basically, designing really good video games is actually hard, and it's a real skill, and it requires tons of talent and experience. And so, whereas I think with DeFi, a lot of traditional financial services is very unwilling to even get involved in this. So it kind of left this mile-wide lane open for new innovators to do interesting stuff. In the world of video games, there are lots of innovative tech sort of anti-establishment people in that world, and we can see them being the ones that actually design these incredibly immersive, really fun games that also contain components of what you're talking about, like NFT avatars or play to earn, economic models. And that's something that I would just be so fascinated by. Like imagine, Red Dead Redemption or Call of Duty or something, where there's also all of that other stuff. Like I can see that being, a multi-trillion-dollar industry at some point, because it isn't just about, video games with little controllers. It's about an alternate world where we are spending more and more of our time, and that's taking a bigger share of our wallet, that represents a bigger portion of who we are and our identity and all these other things. So yeah, we'll have to do the video game episode. Mm-hmm. Is that DeFi? I don't even know what's DeFi anymore. So we'll do the video game episode next. Charlie, we're at the sort of end of our time here. It's really great to see you and to catch up. And sounds like it was an eventful trip that you had to Lisbon. I know you were doing some other stuff while you were there too. So I'm not sure what to call this episode. Solana and the future of crypto scaling? I don't know. Or is it AY's dystopian view of video games in the future? We'll see. Anyway, that's it for today's episode. Thanks for joining us. That's number 21, and we'll see you for number 22 next week. Take care, everybody.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.